Information confidential. So the Lions are holding out hope that Johnson will reconsider, but a person close to the receiver said he's pretty content with his decision. Skip, did this surprise you, this news?
Molly, Stephen A., no, it didn't surprise me. And I do believe that Calvin Johnson, the great Calvin Johnson, will stay retired. By all accounts, Stephen A., he's been very wise with his money. As we all know, he's made a ton, and I believe he's saved a ton. He's recently started a family, and I remind you, his mom is a doctor, and I'm going to assume she's had some input into the role concussions might play in his next life after football if he continues to play football. And if you've followed his career closely, Stephen A., and I know you have, I always admired Calvin because he never shied from going over the middle. Often double-teamed, if not always double-teamed. Took a lot of punishment. His body started breaking down the last couple of years, according to several sources close to him. And this is beyond just the usual ankle injuries that he suffered periodically throughout his career. Obviously, his Lions aren't exactly on the verge of winning a Super Bowl. So this brings me to my final point. Again, according to a couple of people I know who know Calvin very well, he was never really driven to play football in the first place. It was never the be-all and the end-all for him. That his first love was actually baseball. He's very good at baseball, wanted to play both at Georgia Tech, and his mom said, no, you need to focus on your studies, so pick one, and he chose football. But his heart was never really in football the way, say, Jerry Rice's was or Michael Irvin's was, to the point you had to sort of drag them away in a straitjacket, tell those two guys, nope, you cannot play anymore. In this case, Calvin Johnson had a choice here. He had a great career, had a great nickname, Megatron, and yet he chose to go out on his own terms. And I really appreciate and respect that, and I wish him well in his career after football.
Well, I echo all of those sentiments. I think that he's a great person. I think he obviously was a phenomenal football player. I'm looking here, the last 6 years of his career, he's been a 1,000-plus yard receiver, a minimum of 1,200 yards in 5 of those last 6 seasons. This year, he only had 2 100-plus yard games, and they were both against Chicago. But nevertheless, it doesn't take away from the greatness that he's exhibited. You could say he's quitting on the Lions. I'm quite sure people in Detroit will feel that way. My whole point is the Lions continuously quit on their players because they refuse to put together a consistent, formidable franchise. And you have to ask yourself, how much is it worth to really play for this relatively moribund franchise? Jim Caldwell, I will applaud him for taking, keeping this team fighting and making them tinker towards respectability at the tail end of the season. Obviously, the ownership made some changes. We know the job that Matt Millen, our very own Matt Millen, did when he was there. We respect him as an analyst, but as the executive of the Detroit Lions, he was god-awful. It's just that simple. So when you look at it from that perspective, the fact of the matter is that if you're Calvin Johnson, why risk it? His knees were constantly being tinkered with. He wasn't 100% healthy. He was getting hit unnecessarily, I might add. And Skip, in all of his years in the NFL, these 9 seasons, the man played in a grand total of 2 playoff games and lost both of them. Never won a playoff game. Had 211 receiving yards and 12 receptions against New Orleans back in 2011 when they got blitzed by the Saints 45-28. And then last year, of course, had 85 yards on 5 receptions going up against your Dallas Cowboys. In the end, though, he's never won a playoff game, and we all know it's not his fault. We all know that it's been about the team around him. So why risk your health to play with the Detroit Lions? What have they done to garner any kind of confidence whatsoever that you should go out there and risk life and limb to do what? To play 16 games and then go home in a divisional playoff game if you're lucky, or a wild card game because you haven't won a playoff game in his entire history there. They're pathetic. And I know that Jim Caldwell has tried to aim them in the right direction. Did a good job with them last year. This season, so-so. But in the end, the Detroit Lions as an organization doesn't give you too much reason to be confident and enthusiastic and hopeful. So if that is the case, why risk life and limb? For what? You don't need the money unless you need the money. but I don't think he needs the money. So if you don't need the money, why bother? They're not a franchise worth doing that for. This is not New England. You know, it's not Pittsburgh. It's not Seattle. It's not somebody like that. These are the Detroit Lions. Why waste your time?
Okay, I hear everything you just said, but when you go to pathetic, just for the record, those two teams you brought up, the one that lost at New Orleans and then the next one last year that lost at Dallas, those weren't pathetic teams. Those were very dangerous teams with the first pick in the draft at quarterback and Matt Stafford, who could get hot and crazy hot. They could have gone a distance in the playoffs, and they fizzled in their first game, in part because they got a bad break on a call in Dallas, but they played a close game in Dallas. They did not play a close game in New Orleans. But, again, nobody was winning at New Orleans at that point. Everybody was getting blitzed.
I apologize for my lack of clarity. I wasn't talking about those two teams being pathetic. I was talking about the Lions as an organization. I was saying that this is an organization that hasn't won a playoff game since 1991. This is an organization that's been to 2 playoff games at the turn of the millennium. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the absence of consistency, the absence of consistent competitiveness, the fact that you've got a guy like this talent in Calvin Johnson. Matthew Stafford, mistakes and all, is still a pretty damn good quarterback. You've had Ndamukong Suh. You let him walk away. Fairly and those boys. You let them walk away. I'm saying that you've had the makings of something special, and you could never keep it together. They've never even made the playoffs in back-to-back years since 1995. I mean, come on now. That's all I'm trying to say. That's what I mean by pathetic.
Okay. I'm with you.
So no rings on the horizon could be part of it. And Skip also alluded to the health. Calvin Johnson has been on the injury report in more than half of the weeks of his career with injuries to 11 different body parts. And you guys mentioned the healthy salary. Megatron's made about $114 million in his career. He's walking away from $68 million over the next 4 seasons. He will certainly be missed. We so enjoyed watching him play. Something Tim Duncan is next. The Spurs haven't been the same without Tim Duncan in the lineup, and Charles Barkley thinks the Spurs should get used to this. Skip, Stephen A. will react to Barkley.